We often think, as you said, of Wi-Fi as internet over the air. What I like to think about it is a radio signal that's carrying our data. And the more that you know about that radio, the better chance you have of being able to hack it. This is one of those signals, right? A quantum computer could break the encryption on the Wi-Fi, both the encryption and determine the algorithm. And with that, then all the Wi-Fi is unsafe. Still, it emphasizes the importance of understanding wireless communication, wireless protocols, and wireless encryption.
So, hey everyone, I'm Yaniv Hoffman, and with me is Master Hacker OccupyTheWeb. And today we are going to speak about Wi-Fi radio signals. And Wi-Fi is more than just internet in the air. It's radio waves carrying out our data. So the only thing standing between these signals and the attacker is encryption. And today with OTW, we will look at Wi-Fi as radio and how those signals can be examined, captured, and secured. And with that said, welcome, OTW. Always pleasure to have you here.
Hey, Yaniv. It's an honor to be asked to be on your show. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be back.
So this is exciting topic, and many of our viewers are continuously asking about SDR and radio hacking and signals. So I think this will address many of the requests. So I'm super excited to have you speak about it today. But before we dive in, a quick note. And most of you watching right now aren't subscribed. And this channel isn't sponsored. I fund it myself, driven by my passion for cybersecurity and sharing these stories with you. If you're enjoying the videos, only if, and want to see more, it just takes a second to hit the subscribe button, like, share the video. It really helps me keep going. Now, let's get into it.
Great. Well, let's get started. So as you can see, this is Dragon OS. Dragon OS is my favorite SDR software. It's actually an operating system with a lot of software built into it. It's worth downloading because it saves you a heck of a lot of time and energy in trying to download, install, and configure various applications for SDR. So thank you, Aaron. Hopefully you see this and hear it, okay? Aaron's the fellow who's behind Dragon OS. But what I want to talk about here is the idea of, we often think, as you said that we often think Wi-Fi is internet over the air. What I like to think about it is a radio signal that's carrying our data. And the more that you know about that radio signal, the better chance you have of being able to hack it. You know, in the past, we've always focused upon, as hackers, we focus on breaking the shared key, the pre-shared key, PSK. And that's still possible. You know, I think last time I checked, 94% of the world's APs, okay, are using WPA2, relatively simple to capture the password as it travels from the client to the AP. And then once that happens, and something like AirCrack or a number of other tools, Wi-Fi do that really well. So, you know, that's kind of tried and true method of hacking Wi-Fi. I think one of the more interesting things also about what's happening in Wi-Fi is what we did our last video on, and the idea that all of these Wi-Fi signals are emanating from the home. With the inclusion of AI, we can interpret those signals to determine where the objects are and where they're moving within the room. That's not something that's new, okay? It's been around for about 15, 16 years, but now software-free hardware, you know, about an extra $1,000 and you can then be able to see the objects in somebody's home. That's kind of a scary thing. We talked about this. That's kind of one of the interesting things that's happening to Wi-Fi recently. I also want to just kind of give a shout out to, you know, the Russians who developed the nearest neighbor attack, right? The nearest neighbor attack is where, you know, we used to think of as Wi-Fi as this being localized, you know, within 100 meters of the AP, what have you. Kind of a neighborhood attack. Mm-hmm. But the Russians did an attack called the nearest neighbor attack, where they attacked the building, the entity next door in the building, and then control their systems and then use their Wi-Fi to attack the neighbor, right? So what this says to me is that you're only as secure as your nearest neighbor, right? We used to think about, okay, you're only as secure as the weakest user on your network, right? But now this expands it, and now you're only as you're only as strong as your weakest neighbor, as they have proven in that attack. So that's just a few years ago they did that. And so we have some interesting things going on in Wi-Fi now. It's not just the old, same old, where people try to do a hash crack on a captured hash traveling between the AP and the client. But that's still, like I said, that's good 94 of all the APs out there are vulnerable to that type of attack. WPA3, the new system, the new protocol that's out for WPA is more secure. It still can be attacked as well. And of course, there's all kinds of things like, evil twin attacks that are being used daily, around the world. So one of the things that has come to my attention, I just want to just divert for just a little while, is that we have been seeing an awful lot of small businesses and individuals being hacked, by competitors, right? By family members. I mean, it's amazing what we're seeing. There's so much going on. It's not just nation states and cybercrime. We now have a lot of people who have enough skills to be able to attack their neighbor, attack their family member, attack the competitor's business. And I have not seen this before. And so this is kind of interesting what's happening. And we see an awful lot of it. And one of those attacks, one of those vectors of those attacks is the evil twin attack that I was just referring to. And that's relatively easy to be able to do. It doesn't take a IT expert to execute a evil twin attack. And then once you have an evil twin in place, then you have all of the target's traffic. And you have all the target's traffic going across your AP, which means you can collect all their passwords and what have you. Okay, so lots of things going on. I've seen more and more, and I'm seeing more and more that wireless attacks are becoming the primary vector for attacks on all entities, across the board, businesses, nation states and individuals. I'm seeing more and more wireless attacks. And probably that's because the wireless is, it's available to everybody, right? You don't have to get inside somebody's computer. It's going right past your ear, and all you have to do is intercept it. So what I'd like to do today is to try to visualize what's going on in Wi-Fi signals. Right? We're going to try to visualize it. And we're going to use a Dragon OS with a Hack RF to do this. For those of you who don't have a Hack RF, the RTL SDR is great. It does the job, much cheaper, but it's only a receiver. Okay, so that's this major drawback. It's only a receiver. It can't go ahead and transmit, so it makes it difficult to do any serious hacking if you can't transmit. So you can only receive. It's like the RTL SDR is kind of like your radio in your car or in your home. It just picks up the radio waves and you listen to them, but you can't send the signals. And the Hack RF is able to send signals as well. And so that's why I use it for this type of work. I mean, I have others, but this is the least expensive one, although there's a new one that's out called the Libra that I haven't tested yet. It's a little less expensive and more powerful. I'd like to check that one out. So in any case, here's the Hack RF. That's all I need. It's about $350, unfortunately, so it's a little pricey. But what I want to do is use it now to go and take a look, at the signal, the Wi-Fi signal. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So I went ahead and just selected a Hack RF spectrum analyzer. Basically, you can use any spectrum analyzer. It doesn't matter. I'm just using this one now. Any spectrum analyzer is going to do the job for you, attach it to a hacked RF with an antenna. The antenna is going to give you better reception. You're going to get more signal that way. I think in this line right now, I have a small amplifier in this line as well. So the amplifier just simply takes the signal and makes it a little stronger. We know this from our music systems, right? That's what I have. I have a small one on here. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but it does make a difference. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. I think the amplifier that I'm using is like $50, so it's pretty inexpensive. So here we see, okay, I've got it centered, okay, on the area, okay, of the Wi-Fi signal. Well, I have it centered on the Wi-Fi signals, okay, between 2.4 gigahertz to 2.5 gigahertz, and I want to turn the gain up a little bit. Okay, give it a second. There we go. Okay, so I've turned the gain up, and now you can see a little clearer what's actually taking place here. Right? So those of you who have some knowledge of frequencies and radio spectrum and Wi-Fi will recognize that the very first channel, okay, of Wi-Fi is right around 2.41. So remember, and I have a little, you all know who into wireless signals and hacking and IT, that there are 14 channels on Wi-Fi, right? 14 channels. This is 802.11, and these are the various frequencies and the channels. There's 14 channels. Create some separation and to minimize interference between signals. We usually just use channel 1, 6, and 11. Okay, but there's sometimes it'll set up the signal on a different channel as well, but this gives maximum separation, okay, between the signals, so they have less and less chance of interference. As you can see, here's the band right here that channel 1 uses, and it doesn't overlap channel 6. But if we use channel 5, you're going to see there's a little bit of overlap. All right, channel 4 is even more overlap. That means there's a greater chance for interference. So you're going to get less integrity in your signal, right? You're going to have data that's going to get corrupted. You're going to have packets that are going to get dropped. So if you have the whole frequency to yourself, it's going to get the greatest fidelity. And so here you can see that channel 1 is centered at about 2.412. There it is right there. And then channel 6 is at 2.437. And channel 11 is at 2.462. And then we have to go all the way out to channel 14, which doesn't exist in the United States. Okay, actually 11, 12, 13, or 14 are not used in the US. But in some countries it is being used. And so it's 2.484. So those are the center frequencies. That means that's where the center of the signal is coming from, right? So let's go ahead now, and now that we have that information, let's take a look at our spectrum analyzer. All right, so let's take a look at it, and we see right here, just like we saw in that graph, right? It's almost perfect. It's centered right on 2.412. You can see it right here. Down below, you can see, this is what's showing you the data that's passing here, the signal that's passing here, right? Of course, the signal has the data, right? So you can see this is where it's channel 1. And it looks like channel 1 is the strongest signal I'm seeing in my area, all right? Now, you can see a weaker signal here, okay? That's probably somebody nearby using channel 6, right? And then out here, you actually see a little bit in this area here. There shouldn't be. This would be like channel 14 right here. So it's probably not a Wi-Fi signal, but you're probably getting some more Wi-Fi data transferring here. Mm-hmm. But the strongest signals are channel 1 and channel 6. Right? The reason I find this interesting is that, one, okay, we're talking about here is we're seeing this signal and it's spread over multiple frequencies. And so it's not all going over a single frequency. It's going over multiple frequencies. And that's what's called spread spectrum, okay? That's called spread spectrum as a way to be able to, it's a frequency hopping mechanism, right? it's a part of cryptography, right? And it's a way to take the signal and break it up and send it over different frequencies. Okay, and the only one on the other end, the only one who knows what the algorithm for reassembling the packets is the other end of the connection, right? Mm. So both ends of the connection have to go ahead and exchange protocols, essentially. Okay? How are we going to encrypt our information? And so this is one of the things that makes cracking Wi-Fi more difficult. Okay, is that there is a spread spectrum. Okay, encryption going on here. This is frequency hopping. So the data is being sent at different frequencies, different packets at different frequencies. And then the receiver has to regenerate, okay, those packets and make it into a understandable signal. And so what we can see here is I just wanted to help visualize what's going on in the frequency spectrum of Wi-Fi. And so one of the things that is possible, right, we know this from a number of different attacks, is that there is the possibility of you doing a replay attack, right? So what this would allow us to do by understanding where the signal is at, it'll help us in being able to determine possibly what the frequency hopping algorithm is, taking the packets, analyze them, and then once you do that, then you can essentially break Wi-Fi without necessarily having, that would break the spread spectrum part of it. So there's actually two encryption mechanisms going on in Wi-Fi, right? There's that in WPA2, there's the use of the AES, okay, encryption, okay, of the signal, and we have that going on. And that AES is symmetric, it's on both ends, right? And so that works pretty darn good, right? That works. AES is considered to be unhackable, right? But that raises just another issue and question that we have to think about here in the very near future. And that is that quantum cryptography and quantum computers are going to make all of this encryption vulnerable. And despite what some of the best minds think, I think we're probably 3 years away from having available quantum computers by the government, right? And what does that mean? That means then that the government should be able to break all your encryption. And just this past week, okay, one of the leading quantum computer companies signed a contract with the U.S. Air Force to provide quantum computing for them. So I just want to make it a heads up that those of us who make a living in IT security need to think about what this is going to mean to us in the very near future when all of our data is now going to be exposed. And some people will say to me, well, it's only PKI. It's only asymmetric encryption that's going to be broken. And that's a misunderstanding of what's actually going on, because remember that we use asymmetric encryption, okay, to exchange keys. In many, many, many algorithms, we use the asymmetric encryption to exchange keys. So if I can break your asymmetric, then I can see your keys, right? So that's what's going to be happening real soon. This is a much easier problem, okay, to handle here, the frequency hopping, because there's a limited number of algorithms, and if you collect enough data, you can always figure out what the algorithm is. And this is something that's similar to Bluetooth. Bluetooth does exactly the same thing, and Bluetooth actually uses the same space, the same bandwidth, okay, the 2.4 to 2.5 gigahertz. This is both Bluetooth. There's some Zigbee in here as well. If you have Zigbee, Zigbee is often used as a wireless protocol in home automation systems. So Zigbee actually operates on multiple frequencies, but in part it operates in this frequency. So you can see this is probably my channel 1. This is probably my channel 6, and out here there's probably a little bit of channel 11. It looks like. right here. So what this allows, by understanding this about the signal, it's possible to capture the signal and possibly replay it, right? You may not, in some instances, you may not have to actually break any passwords or break any encryption, but simply capture the signal and then resend it. And that's possible. You can do that as well with the application in Dragon OS that does it really well, called the Universal Radio Hacker. One of the protocols that keeps people from replaying attacks is timestamps, right? It's timestamps. So the possibility exists, okay, if I can capture the zeros and ones, then I can. If I can capture the 0 and 1s right here, then I could change the timestamp on it and replay it. So I guess I'm just trying to throw out, ways of hacking Wi-Fi that people hadn't thought of before, right? That there's a lot of different possibilities. We've seen recently some researchers come up with a way of having, it's kind of a situation that's very specialized in particular, and that is where they could install malware on a computer and then have the CPU emit Wi-Fi signals, and those Wi-Fi signals could be read.
As OTW mentioned, signal hopping, it comes from the early wireless system. Instead of staying on one channel, devices quickly hop between frequencies in a pattern that both sender and receiver knows. So how it's related to encryption? So signal hopping or spreading is about where the signal lives on the spectrum. And we saw it. Number 1, channel 1, 6, 11, etc. Encryption is about scrambling the data inside those signals so attackers can't read it even if they capture it. In early Wi-Fi used WEP, weak, broken, okay, but then came the WPA, WPA2 with the TKIP and AES as OTW mentioned, and today WPA3 is the gold standard using stronger key exchanges, more simultaneously authentication of equals. It's called the SAE. So hopping makes interception more difficult physically, and encryption makes capture traffic unreadable logically.
Exactly. So I found the research that I was talking about. They did use a CPU. They were able to send signals through the CPU. They were using malware on the system. And that way, they could actually read the data that's going across. So it's another way to spy. It's a pretty difficult thing to do, but it can be done. And I guess I'm just trying to throw out to your listeners that we need to think differently about Wi-Fi, right? And there's a lot of different ways that we can attack that signal and that communication channel. But you have to understand how it works. As Yaniv was saying, he's talking about the frequency hopping and the encryption. So if you are going to attack it, you need to understand that and what you're up against. And the two primary factors that keep Wi-Fi safe are the frequency hopping and the AES encryption. But remember that if we have a quantum computer, then all the key exchanges, almost all of the key exchanges in the world, okay, and all the protocols are going to be susceptible to being able to intercept the key. So if I can crack the asymmetric encryption, the key exchange, then I can just intercept the keys and then I can see everything. And so I think we're only a few years away from that. We're probably looking at 2027, 2028, when we'll see these systems being used by nation-state actors. They initially will cost millions of dollars, but if you're a spy agency, that's not too big of a budget. The rest of us won't see them for 10 years or maybe 5 years or something like that. So it's also, I want to put out the alert that this is something we have to start thinking about as cybersecurity professionals. In 3 years, that's not that far off. It requires a whole new set of hardware and software to be able to implement quantum resistant cryptography. So this is one of those signals, right? A quantum computer could break the encryption on the Wi-Fi, both the encryption and determine the algorithm, okay, the frequency hopping algorithm. And with that, then all the Wi-Fi is unsafe. All of it is unsafe. All of it will be susceptible to being eavesdropped on. And it's just not Wi-Fi. It's any wireless signal. That includes, the cellular signals, that includes Bluetooth signals, that includes Zigbee signals. There's just so many different signals that are out there. I mean, everything in the world is going wireless, right? We've been seeing this transition that's been taking place over 20 years, and it's been accelerating now where there's so many wireless signals carrying data. This is why I have such an emphasis upon this field, okay, of cybersecurity, is because this is the future. This is what everything is going to be going over a wireless signal. I think the Ethernet will probably go the wayside in a few years, and everybody on their network will be using wireless signals. It may not be Wi-Fi. It could be a different signal as well. But it still emphasizes the importance of understanding wireless communication, wireless protocols, and wireless encryption. Right?
So you mentioned OTW, you mentioned quantum computers, a nation state that, of course, have access to this, to the technology, so they can definitely decrypt the asymmetric encryption maybe easily or easier. But what about the normal people or even cybersecurity professional? How are these to really hack Wi-Fi today with standard tools that we are speaking about?
Well, okay, it's actually relatively easy to hack Wi-Fi. Right? So most of the Wi-Fi access points, right, most of them are WPA2, okay, PSK. And that's over 90%. Last count, I think it's 94% last time I checked, are WPA2. And WPA2 basically is sending a hash between the client to the AP. A hash of a password. And that password is passing by us, right past our bodies and minds. It's going right by us. All we have to do is intercept it. Right? They have to intercept it, capture it. And then it becomes kind of an old school password cracking exercise. Okay, so once you capture the hash, then you can use various programs, okay, including Hashcat or even AirCrack itself, to be able to crack it. And so it's not that hard, but it's for people who are using simple passwords in Wi-Fi, it can be broken in a matter of minutes. But most people are not using simple passwords. No, some are, but most people are not. And so then it becomes more difficult, right? And it requires that, you have a good password cracking list, because that's what it comes down to, is to simply, is their password in your list? That's all it comes down to. Is their password in your list? And, there's a lot of possibilities out there. People still use relatively simple passwords. Some do. And it's also important to note that in password cracking, Wi-Fi password cracking, that the name of the SSID is added to the password, all right, and then hashed, okay? This is an anti-rainbow table feature. The idea is that it used to be that you could simply find, a AP that was named Netgear or Cisco, right? And then just run through a rainbow table. A rainbow table is just a big table of hashed passwords. And all that then is a lookup exercise. You're simply taking the hash that you've captured and comparing it to all the hashes on your table. It takes about 5 seconds at most, on the size of the table. And then the password. Well, that doesn't work in modern systems, WPA2 modern systems, because they're using the SSID as a hash, and they make the SSIDs unique. That defeats rainbow tables. Now, you might find an old WPA2 PSK system that can be attacked, with a rainbow table, but it's really rare, just like attacking a WEP system, WEP system. They're out there. If you go look around, you'll find them. But they mostly, they basically were obsolete 20 years ago, but people don't always update and upgrade. So in modern systems, to crack Wi-Fi, it's just a matter of having a simple program like, I can just show you. All right. I'll show you an easy to use. I'm going to have to switch operating systems, right? So
while you find it, it's interesting. You mentioned it's easier also to find the password, and in reality, most of the Wi-Fi X now target bad password, as you mentioned, or misconfiguration, or social engineering, not the encryption itself.
Because the encryption is tough, and the encryption is difficult to do. Well, I found that Wi-Fi always does well. Okay? And so this is kind of it's meant to visualize the Wi-Fi and gives us some basic information on channels and frequencies, which I think that from what I found, most people don't really understand that.
So the conceptual process of hacking Wi-Fi, first you capture the signal and you put your wireless card into monitor mode and capture the raw radio traffic, the packet. What really you are after is the handshake itself, the authentication exchange between a device and the Wi-Fi access point. Then the goal is to extract the handshake, because this handshake contains the cryptographic material, but not the password directly. It's essentially a proof of the conversion you will later try to solve. Following that, the attempt is to derive the key. So using the handshake, attackers attempt to guess the pre-shared key, the PSK, like what OTW mentioned. And this is usually done by dictionary attacks, brute force, or rainbow tables, as just mentioned also by OTW. So strong, unique password make these steps nearly impossible. That's why it's super important. And the last stage is decrypt the traffic if it's successful. So if the attackers guesses the right password, they can use it to decrypt the captured packets. And at this point, they see the unencrypted traffic moving over the Wi-Fi. So in simple terms, capture, handshake, try to crack the password, and then decrypt the traffic.
What we're going to do now is we're going to use a relatively simple program called Wi-Fi to do the interception of the password as it crosses the air, right? That's all we're doing. We intercept that, and then it allows us to then do basically a hash crack, which is basically a word list lookup. That's what it is. It's looking for, taking a list of passwords, encrypting them with whatever is being used by that system, right, and the salt, and then comparing it and seeing if it matches. That's what it's doing. So let's go ahead and get this going. Yeah, it's got to be sudo, of course. This is built in, by the way, to Kali, so no need to go ahead and download or install any of the software. Okay, so it's enabled. What this is a front end. Okay, it's a GUI for air crack, is what it is. All right, and so it's going ahead and scanning. Okay, across, looking at all of the local APs. Notice they're on 1, 6, and 11. Mostly, there's some exceptions. Here's one on 3. Here's one on 5, but mostly on 1, 6. Okay, and look at here's the FBI surveillance system. Oh, okay. You guys are on to me. They're on to me again. Darn. So, anyways, So what we need to do is we just select one that we want to go ahead and see if we can crack the password. Right? And so let's see. Let's try.
And again, we do it in closed environment, right? On your side.
Right. Yeah. This is a system that I own. So yes. So yeah, we're not hacking any of our neighbors or anything like that. So what we're doing is we're basically looking at one that we have. Okay. And I'm not seeing it on this scan. So here's all of the systems nearby. You can see some of them have clients. This is. Those of you who've used aircraft, remember that one of the things that you look for in being able to do a interception of the hash is you look for a client, because the client is what's going to go ahead and send the password to the AP, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've got to find somebody who has a connection. Oh, there is what's called the PMKID attack. And Wi-Fi can do that as well. So in that case, you don't need a client, right? But here's one right here that we own, okay? Number 6, all right? So let's go ahead and one of the things that gets a little tricky here is that they jump around, they move to different numbers, right? So it's number 11 now. Hopefully it doesn't change there it is, number 11 still.
Yeah.
Oh, Control C. All right. And so Control C, it kind of stops it for a moment. Let's look and see. We want number 7. All right. All right. See how sweet this little application is? So it went ahead and started the attack on Mandela. It went and used PMKID. PMKID is a relatively new attack where it basically is able to extract the hash out of the AP itself, right? That's what it did here. And it actually got it. It got the hash. It went ahead and tried cracking it, okay? Then next it went ahead and tried the WPA handshake capture. This is what we're talking about. This is basically where it intercepts the handshake, right? And it found it. Right. Notice that it got the PMKID, but couldn't crack it. But then it went and got the WPA hash. And then it went ahead and started doing an analysis on it. Right. And then it ran aircrack. Okay. Aircrack, of course. That's the one it's the granddaddy of Wi-Fi hacking. So this is basically a very nice and useful front end for aircrack. It uses aircrack within the word list probable. And it found the password right there. It's a relatively small password list, but it found it there. And so it tells us the password is Linus Pauling. Okay. So relative simple is probably the easiest tool to use, okay, for Wi-Fi cracking. It goes through multiple possibilities, attack scenarios, right? Based upon what it sees. It does a pretty good job. You can see it did the PMKID attack and the WPA handshake and captured it and hacked it and was able to do it in just a matter of seconds. But it was a simple password, right? The password is simple. If the password is complex and longer, it may have found it, it may not have found it, in which case then I'd have to go to another list. And maybe one of the things that I think people don't think about is that you might want to create your own list, right? If you know who this particular person is, or what company it is, or what institution it is, you can probably put in some good guesses, okay? And there's certain tools like Cup that can help you make a password list, and you can do it based upon what you know. So there's probably the person's name. And number 2 is probably important to them. Maybe it's the second Mandela. I don't know. But these are the kind of things you start asking yourself, and then you can create password lists that are unique to that particular person.
Yeah.
Right? Using tools like Cup or Crunch. Okay. And they'll create password lists that are unique. Very often people will use the same password that they used before, but they put a bunch of numbers on the end of it. And a tool like Crunch is really good at doing that, right? A tool like Cup is more like you have to know something about the individual, their name, their birth date. You can get all that through OSINT, right? Their name, their birth date, their dog's name, their children's name, their spouse's name, and you stick it all in there. And these are the things that people use for passwords, right? I mean, people do this all the time. They name the password on their system is their name and their birth date, right? Or their name and their child's birth date, or their name or the child's name and the number of children. I mean, those are the kind of things that people use for making passwords. And a tool like Cup is really good at making a nice size list of like 5,000 to 10,000 possibilities, and that are unique to that person. And then, of course, something like Crunch will take a keyword, like maybe the company name, the family name, and then add letters and numbers or special characters before, after. The problem with Crunch is you can actually make these terabyte password lists, and then that becomes a little unwieldy, but you can do it, and then you might take up your whole hard drive doing it.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful in using it. Right? You might make too big of a list, and then you're not in that case you're not very far from simply a brute force attack against the password. So I think there's a lot of things that one can do. There's a lot of different ways of attacking Wi-Fi, and there's always new ways all the time that are coming out. As you said, WPA3 is much more secure than WPA2, but it's only 3% of all the APs that are out there. So the other 97% are still out there and relatively easily attacked. There's also, with WPA3, you can actually do a downgrade attack, right? Which is because the WPA3 has to be backwardly compatible to WPA2, you can do a DOS attack against WPA3, and it'll go ahead and it'll drop down into WPA2 mode, and then it'll exchange the password in this hash, this four-way handshake, and we can intercept it there. One last thing I wanted to talk about here is that one of our associates at Hackers Arise recently put together a nice Python script that uses some advanced mathematical techniques to be able to tell you the location of the APs. It'll tell you the location of the APs. So it's pretty cool. And we have an article on Hackers Arise on it. And it's creating a Wi-Fi scanner, like something like this, is from scratch is not that difficult to do. But what's really unique about this script is that it makes a really good attempt at telling you where the APs are relative to you. Okay, which ones, based upon a number of different factors, but of course you can tell probably the most important factor is going to be strength of signal, right? So by strength of signal, we can tell, with some accuracy how far away it is, but in what direction is it? That's still another thing entirely. And it also depends upon, the strength of signal is going to be dependent upon what kind of environment you're in. So if you're in an urban environment, right, the signals are all going to be weak because all the buildings are in the way. And if you're out in the country someplace, then the signals are going to be uninterrupted, and they're going to get to you relatively strong. So you have to kind of adapt your readings on this tool by what environment you're in. But then it goes ahead and it maps out each of the APs and where they are relative to you, which can be a really useful tool if you're doing Wi-Fi security.
Right.
And he calls it Hackers Arise Radar. So you can see that on Hackers Arise, okay?
So we'll publish definitely the article, and the link will live in the description so everyone can access. So to wrap it up, so Wi-Fi is just radio in the air, and encryption is the shield. So the reality, as OTW mentioned, only about 3% of the networks use WPA3, which means the vast majority are still on older, more vulnerable standards. And now there are many ways attackers can try to hack them, but strong encryption and solid password are still your best defense. So big thanks to OTW for joining me today. As always, it was insightful. If you have any comment, please leave it in the description. We leave all of the links, including into the access into HackerRise, the articles and the courses, and see you in the next video.